I've shared with you a lot of small shifts we can all make in our daily habits to live more sustainably. Now, I'm going to tell you this. The individual choices we make are important, but they're insufficient on their own. Whether we should be talking about personal responsibility at all is actually a topic of great debate among climate activists. Some argue that focusing on individual choices and personal responsibility takes attention away from the real systemic factors that have created the climate crisis. It doesn't recognize how individual choices are shaped and constrained by the system in which those choices are made. The people are doing the very best they can in situations where they have little choice at all. And I get that. I mean, anyone who doubts it should try giving up single-use plastic for one day and then actually go and live in the world. They'll quickly get it too. Don't get me wrong. Our individual choices do matter. The choices we make send a message to companies and governments. They can inform and inspire people around us. They can fuel collective action. They just aren't enough. The reality is that even if every single one of us were zero-waste composters who rode our bikes to work, gave up our bacon habits, and stocked our bathrooms with reusable toilet paper, we would still have the issues facing the planet that we do now. That's why we gotta have systemic change with policies and legislation that advance known climate solutions. Without it, we're raking leaves in a windstorm. There's so much we can learn from the American Civil Rights Movement. The individual sacrifices, the collective action those sacrifices contributed to, the fact that civil rights activists never lost sight of broader structural dynamics and the importance of legislation and policy change. Reverend Lennox Yearwood of the Hip Hop Caucus summed it up well.
They also understood that demonstration without legislation leads to frustration.
Listen, I won't tell you who to vote for, but I will tell you that if a political candidate says this...
The climate change agenda is a hoax. The climate change agenda is a hoax, and we have to declare independence for it.
Well, you definitely shouldn't vote for him. We just can't have that kind of tomfoolery in our elected leaders, y'all. The world is changing, and it's not enough to change in our own homes. We need political change at every level, in our cities, our states, the country, and across the world. It's helpful to have at least basic knowledge about two particularly significant pieces of legislation that reflect the kind of change we need: the Paris Accord and the Inflation Reduction Act. The Paris Accord is a landmark international agreement that was adopted at the end of 2015 by 195 nations, nearly every nation on Earth.
L'accord de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
The purpose of the agreement was to address climate change and its negative impacts. It included three major components: a commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions this century 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, while each country also pursues how they can limit the increase to a much more preferable 1.5 degrees. A commitment to be accountable to climate goals and to transparently monitor and report on progress toward them. And a commitment to mobilize support for developing nations to assist them with climate mitigation and adaptation efforts. The fact that that many countries could agree on something is impressive. That they all agreed to take action on it together is astonishing. The United States later pulled out of the historic Paris Agreement under the previous president, joining the company of Iran, Yemen, and Libya.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
It was a move condemned harshly by world leaders across the globe. I mean, it's pretty bad when the Vatican is mad at you. Scientists, CEOs of major American companies, and a whole bunch of ordinary citizens urged Trump to remain in the accord and sharply denounced America's withdrawal. Even major gas and oil companies supported the Paris Accord, y'all. So this newspaper headline seemed fitting. Thankfully, the United States formally rejoined the Paris Accord as quickly as the new president was legally able to do so. We should expect all of our political leaders to support the Paris Accord, and we should demand they go further. In mid-2022, a new report from the United Nations on climate change showed that humanity is collectively bending the curve of global greenhouse gas emissions downward. But it remains insufficient to limit global temperature rise to the goal of 2 degrees Celsius, much less the more desirable 1.5 degrees by the end of the century. At this rate, we're on track for a reduction of around 2.8 degrees of warming. If you're thinking 1.5 to 2.8, does it really make a difference? The short answer, yes, it matters a lot. Don't believe me? Here's United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres in response to that report.
Climate time bomb is ticking. This report is a clarion call to massively fast-track climate efforts by every country and every sector. Our world needs climate action on all fronts, everything, everywhere, all at once.
But get this, the phrase fossil fuels doesn't appear anywhere in the Paris Agreement. Neither do the words coal, oil, or methane gas. We know that in order to meet the Paris Accord goals, the majority of fossil fuels need to stay in the ground. But countries economically reliant on them just weren't ready to say that. We need leaders who will say it, that will advance us dramatically toward clean energy and incentivize a variety of innovations. Oh my gosh, should I run for president? The International Panel on Climate Change has said that the choices we make in this decade will have impacts now and for thousands of years. Thank goodness, in August of 2022, we finally passed the Inflation Reduction Act, also known as the IRA. It wasn't easy, it sure wasn't pretty, but it was done, and it's truly something to celebrate. The stated purpose of the Inflation Reduction Act was to lower costs of necessities like healthcare and energy bills, not to fight the climate crisis. But it's the most significant climate legislation to come out of Congress yet. So how does the Inflation Reduction Act actually address the climate crisis? It does that by allocating $369 billion to energy security and climate solutions. This includes several categories of investments. $65 billion was allocated for clean energy and grid-related infrastructure. That includes $10 billion in tax credits to incentivize clean energy manufacturing, and another $30 billion in tax credits to accelerate manufacturing of things like electric vehicles, wind turbines, and solar panels. $30 billion in grant and loans were provided to help states and electric utilities advance the clean energy transition. Check out the overall annual U.S. investments in energy supply-related infrastructure before the Inflation Reduction Act and after. You can see it's a huge and historic increase. The IRA invests over $95 billion in clean transportation. That includes $39 billion to modernize public transit and transportation across the country, replacing thousands of deficient transit vehicles with clean, zero-emission ones. $3 billion will be used to update the U.S. Postal Service fleet. $7.5 billion will go toward building a national network of charging stations for electric vehicles. $20 billion was allocated in loans to build new clean vehicle manufacturing facilities across the country, with an additional $2 billion to go toward revamping existing auto plants to make clean vehicles. Cutting emissions is another category of IRA investment. $20 billion will be used to reduce emissions from the agriculture sector, while $3 billion will be spent to reduce air pollution at airports. Another $27 billion will be invested in research and development to accelerate clean energy and support technologies that curb emissions. This includes funding for breakthrough energy research in government labs. The IRA allocates more than $60 billion toward environmental justice initiatives that address the unequal effects of pollution on low-income communities and communities of color. Preserving and supporting natural resources is another area of focus under IRA. It includes $5 billion in grants to support healthy forests, forest conservation, and urban tree planting, and another $2.6 billion in grants to conserve and restore coastal habitats. Finally, tax credits are a critical category of IRA allocations. This includes rebates and tax credits to encourage things like heat pumps, solar panels, and energy-efficient appliances. It also allocates a $7,500 tax credit for lower to middle-income consumers to buy new electric vehicles, and a $4,000 credit to buy a used one. As a result of these efforts, the Inflation Reduction Act has the potential to reduce our emissions in the U.S. by 40% by 2030. Check out what would happen in greenhouse gas reductions under current policy. It's clearly not enough. The Inflation Reduction Act helps us get much closer to the 2030 target in the Paris Agreement. Yeah, we need to do more, but this historic legislation has us moving in the right direction. And while the Inflation Reduction Act helps us move toward a clean energy future, it also takes care to benefit communities that have been economically dependent on the fossil fuel economy in the past, like coal mining communities who helped to build the prosperity of our country and who aren't at fault for the climate crisis. Tax credits incentivize companies to locate new clean energy jobs in those communities, and funding has been allocated to provide job training for the people who live there. There are also expected economic benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act. American families are expected to save $500 each year on average on lower electricity costs. And by 2030, it's projected that the average household will save up to $1,800 annually as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. 9 million new jobs will be created over the next decade. If you look at the jobs that are created, they come in a lot of different categories. New jobs in solar and wind, in the effort to get clean hydrogen, in electric vehicles and clean technologies. Even battery jobs are booming. And by 2030, it's expected that the United States will reduce our national energy spending by at least 4%. Ah, you're starting to see how it earned the name the Inflation Reduction Act. Yeah, we're spending and investing a lot of money, but we're ultimately saving a lot of money. So the solutions to the climate crisis create jobs, save people money, reduce inflation, and clean up the environment. What's not to like? There are just so many benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act. It helps the U.S. demonstrate leadership in the world. It also allocates resources in a way that promotes environmental justice by ensuring frontline communities, Black, Brown, Indigenous communities, and low-income communities that have been disproportionately victimized by the pollution from burning fossil fuels receive a fair share of the economic benefits as we begin this transition to clean energy. Oh, and in such an irony, 2/3 of the major projects that have been announced since the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act are in districts where lawmakers oppose the law. It's why President Biden got in this little jab in his State of the Union address.
We'll fund these projects, and I'll see you at the groundbreaking.
There are lots of ways we can pressure companies to adopt sustainable practices and urge politicians to take bold and ambitious climate action now. We can vote and help others vote. Find out political candidates' stance on climate issues and make others aware. Join protests. Attend town halls. Sign petitions. Call or write elected officials. Write a letter to the editor. The bottom line is this: tackling the climate crisis requires changes to broader systems and structures. We have to take action in our own lives for that change to happen. And we can actively push for change in broader government policies and practices by being engaged citizens who demand political action. Let's get political, y'all.